So one thing that can be a little bit dangerous is looping the wrist, the leash around your wrist, because that creates a lot of potential for shoulder injury. A slightly safer way to hold a leash, oh my gosh, kitty, let's move on, is to loop the leash either over your thumb or over your hand, but not the wrist, and then grab the leash in a loop like this. So if I have this, you see how easily I can pull my arm down. If I hold the leash here, much harder because I have all of that forearm strength. So give it a try just for fun, even if you have the waist leash. So kind of loop it either over your hand or over your thumb. It doesn't really matter. And then make a loop with the leash and hold on to that loop. Give that a try. And then if you want to get fancy, you can even see what's the difference in terms of how it works with your body.
Hey,
That's also an option.
Yeah, it could be like this, or it could be like this. I actually don't mind if it's like this, if you do the loop, but this is where I've seen most accidents happen. Again, with your dogs, it's not as much as a concern as with some other dogs. You know, if I worked today with a woman who has a 95-pound dog, so, and she's, you know, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. It's like a different concern. Just a few things. I'm gonna see if I can get up and you can still see me. So one thing to keep in mind is if your dog does pull, if your arm is out here, it's much easier for your dog to pull you off balance because we're top heavy as people. So one thing to think about is when the dog pulls, you want to bring your arm down to bring your center of balance lower. So instead of going like this, see if you can bring your arm down because it's a lot harder to pull against you. And if you want to have a lot of strength in the game, you can even pull it across your hip. It's almost impossible to pull you over from that center of balance. That's going to be hard to do in the moment. So that's something you want to kind of experiment with. So I'm going to unpin myself and I'll give you a little bit of a moment here to just play around with that as a concept. Just dabble with like the different leash holds and kind of, you know, imagine. And since Zoe and Nick, there's two of you, you can even, one can be the pulling dog and the other can be the handler. So we talked about the hand grip. We talked about bringing the arm down to withstand a pull. And then we talked about putting it across the hip to kind of really.
Okay.
Something that is probably not necessary for you, but some dogs do really well being walked on a double leash. If there's any danger of pulling over, I just want to mention it as a potential thing. Other than that, I had a couple of points on leash walking, on the leash stuff that you can just experiment with. So we talked about holding the leash. We talked about the cross-body hold. One thing to keep in mind is that I mean, a lot of dogs have learned to pull against the leash and that's kind of a good thing for them, right? They're like, pulling gives me access to fun stuff because a lot of dogs just learn that pulling means they get to go to the sniffy place. But especially with a reactive dog in a situation, you want to have as much as possible. It's not always going to be possible, but when we are going to be working on our exposure setups next week, you want to have somewhat of a loop in the leash, but you don't want to have a 6-foot leash that's dragging on the ground. So I hold the leash as short as is comfortable for the dog, but I'm not, and that's why sometimes the having it around your waist can be a little tricky. What I would recommend is at least having a hand so you can run the leash through and then grab a hold if you have to. You know, full disclosure, I also totally clip my leash to myself. I have my carabiner here. So I'm not against it. I just make sure I'm not dragging a bunch of leash so that if I do have to get a hold of my dog, I can do so easily, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
And obviously, we talked about this last time. What you don't want is to pull your dog towards you when they're being reactive, but instead you want to climb up the leash towards your dog, right? So we're not pulling the dog to us, we are climbing or sliding towards the dog. Does that make sense as a strategy? Yeah. It's just most dogs don't enjoy being pulled. And sometimes for some dogs, it can just make feelings a little bit more, yeah, grumpy. And we don't want to add from when we're trying to change a negative association to a positive one.